As discussed in the previous class, that the research is basically a systematic effort, a systematic method to uncover or to know the new facts, to discover new knowledge, and the definition of science as a process is also very similar to the research, though both differ, and I will not discuss the difference today. The question is that how a researcher, how a scientist knows the new facts, how the knowledge is acquired. So there can be different methods of acquiring knowledge, as I discussed this in the last class also. But all these methods which have been used or are being used are not necessarily scientific in nature. So generally, when we teach this topic, we discuss the 5 commonly used methods: the method of tenacity, intuition, authority, the rational method, and the empirical method. The method of tenacity, the literal meaning of the word tenacity is persistent determination, if you will go and see the literal meaning. But here the method of tenacity means that we believe that we know something by accepting the ideas and beliefs that are being held by others. So holding on to ideas and beliefs simply because they have been accepted as facts for a long time or because of superstition is called the method of tenacity. For example, long back before Renaissance, it was believed that the earth revolves around the sun. No, the sun revolves around the earth. This was the idea. Later on, Galileo and many other philosophers and scientists came and they rejected this idea. But before that, everyone was knowing this fact that the sun is moving around the earth. And how they come to know this fact? It is the method of tenacity. The method of tenacity is such method in which information is accepted as correct, as true. Why? Because we believe that it has always been said again and again. It is being believed by my ancestors, it is being believed by my superiors, or because of some superstition or superstitious belief, we accept the thing as correct and true. So you might be feeling that this way of knowing the things is not scientific because the knowledge gained may not be valid. So the method of tenacity is basically based on our habit or superstition. For example, many believe that if we start our journey and a cat crosses our way, then something wrong will happen. This is our superstition, and if something happens wrong, then gradually this superstitious belief is being reinforced, and people start believing that they know that if this will happen, then this will be the outcome. So this is the method of tenacity. If there is any question, I will ask you at the end of the class. This method is often used by advertisers. You will be seeing in different advertisement that they are repeating the same thing again and again, and with the hope that this repetition will develop a belief in the consumers that what is being said in the advertisement is correct. For example, there is one very common slogan, "दाग ढूंढते रह जाओगे." This is advertisement of a detergent. So that may or may not be correct. There may be other detergents better than that, but repeatedly exposed to that, we start to develop a belief that what is being said is correct. So this is the method of tenacity, and the major problem with this is that the information acquired might not be accurate. It may be accurate sometimes, but it may not be accurate. The second method is the method of intuition, and the method of intuition means knowing something by hunch, by developing an impression that this will be the situation. So when we gain knowledge by such instinctual impressions, then that method is called method of intuition. So information is accepted as true. Why? Because it feels right. It is my gut feeling that this is the real situation. So you claim to know something not on any scientific method, but based on your gut feelings, based on your hunches, based on your assumptions and impressions. So this type of method is called method of intuition. And most of us sometimes in our life use this method, and most often when we use method of intuition for knowing something is the situation where we have no information at all, or we cannot refer to any supporting data or use any rational justification for the known facts. Then the habitual way of knowing the things is the method of intuition. And if you will go through the history, you will find that many of the ethical decisions or moral questions involving what is right and what is wrong is not based on any empirical research or on any experimental method or any other scientific method, but they are most often based on the method of intuition. What feels right is right, what feels wrong is wrong. So this method is also not a scientific method of knowing, and therefore, and when the psychological research follows a scientific approach, this method is also not a good method for us to proceed for our psychological research or psychological inquiry. The third method is method of authority. So, I am a teacher, you consider me as an authority in the area in which I am teaching. So, in this method, people know things from any authority figure or from an expert in the area. So, a person finds answers by seeking out an authority on the subject. That in area of psychology, a psychologist will be the authority. In area of chemistry, a chemistry professor may be an authority. So, the method of authority is a method of knowing in which we consult an expert directly, or indirectly we can consult the writings of those authorities in forms of books, in forms of research papers. So we can go to the library, we can make a Google search, we can read the articles written by expert on the website, and from these sources we know things. So this method is also one method of knowing, but this method is also not scientific method. Why? Because you rely on information or answer to a research question or any internal questions or queries solely on the ideas and views given by a subject expert, a authority figure in the area in which you are asking your question. This is a good starting point to know, because we all are learning from books, from experts, and we rely on those sources also. So it is not very bad method of knowing, but when it comes to the scientific method of knowing, we will say that yes, this is not the scientific method of knowing. Why? Because it is not necessary that it will always provide accurate information. Even a good researcher, for example, Fechner gave a law in psychophysics, and it was accepted by us for a long time. But another researcher, Stevens, came, he challenged the idea given by the Fechner, and he replaced his law by his own law, that is called Stevens power law. So the law given by Fechner was considered accurate because he was one authority figure in the area of psychophysics when psychology was basically starting. He was working even before William Wundt. But this information was proved to be inaccurate later on by Stevens. So it is not necessary that the information or the knowledge gained by the method of authority will always be accurate. Authorities can be biased because of their theoretical framework. For example, why abnormality develops, if you will ask a psychoanalyst, he will say that it is because of the unconscious conflicts which is always going on within our mind. But when you will ask a behaviorist, he will give a different answer. No, we learn all the things. So even the anxiety is a learned behavior, depression is a learned behavior. So authorities may be biased in providing answers. Second thing that limits this method to be used as a scientific method is that answers obtained from authority could represent their subjective personal opinions also. The third, that the status of authority can also have significant influence. For example, if any known psychologist is saying, say, Eysenck is no more, but Eysenck is a known authority in the area of psychology, particularly in the area of personality psychology. If he used to say something, many people start believing that this is the fact, this is the correct information. But it is likely that what was said by Eysenck may be his personal opinion or personal view on the given matter. But the status of the authority was such that we are forced to believe that what is being said is correct. For example, what I am saying about these methods of knowing, being your teacher and you are considering me as an authority, you will believe that what the sir is saying is correct. Another limitation is that not all experts are really experts. They are supposed experts. So, and the degree of expertise also differ. So, all professors are not equally expert in the area. Some may be more expert than the others. And another thing is that most often we develop unquestionable trust on the authority. You do not question the teacher. You say that yes, teacher is saying, then it is correct. But we teachers may sometimes provide you wrong information because of the reasons that I stated earlier. Another method similar to this, or you can say a variant of authority, is the method of faith. In this, people have unquestioning trust in the authority figure, and therefore they develop a faith on those authority figure, and therefore whatever is being said by those authority figures is being accepted as correct knowledge or correct information. For example, in Indian context, there are many saints and sages. We consider them as the seers. They are having a vast knowledge, and so whatever they say, we just believe that they are saying is correct. And why we believe? Because we are having a faith on those experts, those sages and saints. We are not questioning them. We are having an unquestioning trust on those authority figures. This way of knowing is called method of faith, and you all might appreciate that this is also not a scientific method, because the scientific method is the method which always provide objective and verifiable information. This is the rational or logical method is a relatively better method of knowing compared to the methods that I have discussed earlier. This method is based on the philosophy of rationalism that seeks answers by use of logical reasoning. So, the logic, a branch of philosophy, is called logic, and that logical reasoning is used. And generally, we use two types of logical reasoning: the deductive reasoning, and this deductive reasoning method is also called Aristotelian method, in which we develop a specific information based on a general information. So the general may be a theory. So if there is a theory, from that theory we deduce a specific information. For example, if there is a theory that if anything is very hot or warm, it can damage the body cells, so of any animal including human beings, and from this theory we may derive a specific deduction that if we will put hand on a very hot surface, our hand will be burnt, our cells on the hands will be damaged. So we are deducing a specific information from a general information. So this is called deductive reasoning or Aristotelian method. And in this reasoning, there are two sets of statement. The first set is called the premise statement, that describe facts or assumptions that are presumed to be true. I am emphasizing the word presumed to be true. It means that may be true, that may not be true, but we believe that the premises are correct. And if the premises are correct, we judge whether the argument that is followed by the premise statements is correct or not. So an argument is a set of premise statements that are logically combined to yield a conclusion. So based on premise statements, we arrive on a conclusion. This is called deductive method of reasoning. But this method has several limitations. The first limitation is that it will not help us to arrive at a new truth, and as per our definition of research and science, we strive to discover new knowledge. So, the deductive method of knowing will help us to verify a earlier proposed theory or model or knowledge, but it will not help us to arrive at a new knowledge. Why? Because we are starting from a general theory and coming to a specific observation. Another limitation of this method is that the logical conclusions depends on the premises, and the premises itself may not be correct. So the truth of premise cannot be established by logic. We cannot logically establish that the premise statements are true or correct. So we believe that the premise statements are correct, and therefore our conclusion is also correct. So these two limitations are there with even deductive reasoning approach. Another is called inductive reasoning, and Bacon is being attributed with this method, and therefore sometimes we call it Baconian method of knowing. And this is the reverse of the deductive reasoning. The deductive reasoning is from general to particular, and here we start from particular observations and go to a theory. So in this method, generalization is made on the basis of evidences collected through many observations. So we take a sample of say 1000 students, we observe all the 1000 students, and then based on these 1000 particular observations, combining those observations together, analyzing that, we arrive at a general theory. But this method is also not free of limitations. One major limitation is that the same observation may lead to different conclusions. And whenever you will read research papers, you will find that two scientists have obtained the same results, but their conclusions, their inferences are different. So we can interpret the same thing in different way. I will just cite one example, and this is also an example of the risk of logical fallacy in psychological or scientific research. For example, if you will plan a research to know what are the health problems among those who are morning walkers, so you will go in any park or in any area where people used to go for morning walk. You will ask them simple questions like whether you are having diabetes, hypertension, or any other physical conditions. When you will do this, you will find that many of them report that they are having some lifestyle diseases, and based on this observation, you are likely to conclude that those who go for morning walk are vulnerable for developing lifestyle disease, which is in fact contrary to the fact that it helps to improve the disease. But why this happened? Because of the logical fallacy. Those who are going to morning walk are those persons, those individuals who were being recommended by their doctors that go for a walk to control your sugar level, to control your diabetes. Morning walk is essential for you. Why? To control your blood pressure. So you are a hypertensive patient and therefore you are walking. So it is very likely that those who are having the lifestyle diseases will be walking in the morning, and based on this observation we draw a conclusion which is erroneous in nature. So this type of difficulty is always there in inductive reasoning. I will allow you time to ask questions at the end. So this is the schematic representation of the two methods, and I am giving more time because this method of knowing is used in the scientific method to some extent. So in deductive approach of knowing, we begin from a theory, then based on that theory we develop some hypothesis, and to verify that hypothesis we make some observations on n number of individuals, and then based on those observations either we confirm the hypothesis or reject the hypothesis. So as I said earlier, that if you are following this deductive steps of knowing, then you will always confirm a theory or reject a theory, but you will not be able to develop or discover a new fact. This is one limitation of this deductive approach. But in inductive approach, we start from observation itself. So we will observe in n number of individuals. Then after analyzing those observations, we will try to see if there is any pattern in the observations, and based on the observed pattern we will develop a tentative hypothesis, and based on that hypothesis we will propose a theory. In scientific approach, we combine these two methods together. So we start from observation to theory, and then another researcher will take this theory and then will try to test it, and if it is tested again and again, then this newly developed theory or newly developed or newly acquired knowledge is considered a correct knowledge. So this is the method of knowing, which is having some limitations, but when it is combined together, for example, I just said that combining deduction and induction, and when it is combined with some other methods, then it becomes a scientific method of knowing. But in itself, remember, it is not a scientific. So deductive and inductive reasoning based method of knowing is in itself not a scientific method. Because why? Because we may at times arrive at erroneous conclusions. Another method, and it is often confused, that empirical method is the scientific method of knowing. Yes, the answer is partly yes and partly no. The empirical method is used in scientific research and inquiry, but it is systematic empiricism, not the empirical observation itself. So let us know something about the empirical method. When we say empirical method, it is knowing through our sense organs. So this method is based on philosophy of empiricism, which holds that all knowledge is acquired through senses. So there are 5 senses, and using those 5 senses we acquire knowledge about our world. So in this method, in empirical method, following the philosophy of empiricism, we observe people, individuals directly through our sense organs, and based on those observations we obtain knowledge, we acquire knowledge. So if we are seeing something, it is likely that it is correct. If you are listening this, so whatever you are listening, the fact what I am sharing may be correct or incorrect, but what you are observing, it is 100% correct, that I am teaching and you are learning. So most often the level of confidence in this method is very high. We confide in this method that since we have directly heard something, we have directly seen something, then it is correct. However, this empirical method of knowing is also not flawless. It has also some limitation. First, one may misperceive or misinterpret the observations, and you all being students of psychology know the examples of illusion. For example, when we will stand and see two tracks of railways, then they will appear to be touching each other when we will see far away from where we are standing. Similarly, the sky, if there is no tree or no houses built and we are standing and we are seeing sky kilometers away from where we are standing, then we will perceive, we will feel that the sky is touching the earth. But actually the sky is not touching the earth. So illusions may occur. So even what we are seeing, what we are observing may in fact be our misperception or misinterpretation. This cannot be denied. This is always there. Similarly, our sensory experiences can be changed by our prior knowledge or belief. So if we are having some prior knowledge, that knowledge biases our observations and may lead to incorrect information or knowledge. Another limitation is that if you will try to learn all the things, suppose you will not rely on authority like your teachers, like on other researchers, then it will really be a time consuming method, and throughout our life we cannot learn all those things that we have learned. You know a lot of things, and how you have come to know all those things? By empirical observation? No. So every time to know how apple tastes, so you will test the apple and then you will learn that okay, apple tastes like this. So many of the things we learn by other methods also, we know by other methods also. Why? Because if we will rely on this empirical method that it is best method of knowing, why it is best method? Because we are using directly our own sense organs, we are observing, seeing, sensing it. So it will take a lot of time, and it is also not practical to know all the things by making direct observation. Let other researchers also make direct observation, and we all rely on those other researchers, and we believe that what they have observed is also correct, though we have not seen directly by our own senses. So this is another limitation. Similarly, belief, perseverance. Perseverance, when I say, then a repetitive belief. So that repetitive belief is also likely to influence our empirical observations, and sometimes confirmation bias is also seen in this empirical method of knowing. This confirmation bias is a tendency to search out and pay special attention to information that supports one's own beliefs or ideas, while ignoring those information that contradicts our belief. So that confirmation bias is also likely, it cannot be ruled out. So empirical method is a good method of knowing, and the scientists also used empirical method, but pure empirical method, just observation alone, may not be a scientific approach of knowing. So all these 5 methods are in itself not the true scientific method. The scientific, and this is just summary, so tenacity from habit or superstition, intuition we know from hunch or our gut feeling, in authority we know from an expert, In rationalism, we know from reasoning, logical conclusions are drawn based on either inductive or deductive reasoning, and in empiricism, we rely on our direct sensory observations, direct sensory experiences. So, the scientific method is an approach of acquiring knowledge that formulate specific questions and then systematically tries to find the answer to those research questions. And the scientific method basically combines some of the methods like the deductive and inductive method with empirical method, and this combination will become more scientific. Why? Because it is more likely that the knowledge acquired by combination of the logical reasoning and empiricism is likely to be more correct compared to these methods alone. Similarly, in scientific approach, the empirical observations are made in controlled conditions. So, and this is also the definition of experiment. What is experiment? Is defined as observations under controlled condition. So, when we follow the empirical method under controlled condition, then this empirical method becomes the experimental method, and this method will provide a more objective with minimal personal biases. So, empirical observations under controlled conditions are used by scientists, and this is one scientific way of knowing. So, to conclude, the scientific method provides an approach or system of gathering information to discover facts or answer research questions in a way so that the biases and errors are minimized or reduced, and the conclusions that we draw based on those scientific methods are likely to be correct. So, this is about the scientific method, and these are the three core criteria of a scientific method. The first, I have already said something about this. The first criteria is called systematic empiricism. As I said, that empiricism means relying on our observations based on our sense organs. So, empiricism refers to the practice of relying on observation to draw conclusions about the world. I have kept one story of sheep. So, two scientists were standing with each other, and they saw that a herd of sheep were in the field, and the hairs were not on the sheep. So one scientist said that the hairs of these sheep have been cut for producing wool. The another scientist said, yes, but the hairs have been cut on the side that we are seeing. This story tells that when we use empirical approach, the scientific approach, we do not go beyond the observation. So when we are seeing any object, we are seeing only one part of that object. So we should not draw the conclusion about the other part of the object which we are not seeing. So the other scientist said that yes, the half part of the ship, we can definitely say that yes, the hairs have been cut, but we cannot go beyond the data, beyond the observation. So scientists insist that conclusion be based on what can be objectively observed. We never go beyond that observation. and the knowledge is not based on our assumptions, hunches, or unfounded beliefs. But remember that observation alone does not make something a science. If it is scientific observation, then this scientific observation is a systematic, controlled way of making observation. And when I am saying controlled way, we control the extraneous variables, we control the factors that can bias, that can make our conclusions erroneous. So when we are controlling those biasing factors and then we are making observation, that is called scientific observation, and this type of observation is called systematic empiricism. So systematic empiricism is one criteria. If a method is scientific, it will rely on systematic empiricism, not only on empirical observation alone. And remember that we will not move as a scientist beyond the observations. So our all conclusions will be based on observations alone. Second aspect is public verification. Public verification means the observations made by scientists are available for verification by others also. So if we are following a scientific method, it should be very clear, precise, and replicable. So if we are following any method that others cannot replicate, we cannot spell out the methodology in such a way that other can also replicate and observe and verify what is being observed by us, then that method will not be scientific method. So in other words, research must be conducted in such a way that the findings of one researcher can be observed, replicated, and verified by the others. And there are two reasons for this requirement. First, it leads to verify the knowledge gained, whether the knowledge gained is a fabrication or it is real observation. So if it will be fabricated in replication, it will not be observed again. But if it will be a real scientific outcome, then when we will replicate, we will observe the same thing. For example, you might have done trial and error learning practicals in your undergraduate classes. That method was given by Thorndike, and we are repeating as a student again and again, and we are observing the same thing, that with increase in practice, learning improves. So that observation was made public for verification. And second thing is that this public verification helps us to identify if there are some possible errors in the methodology used in the earlier researches, or if there were errors in interpreting the observations. So the other researchers can notice those methodological errors or errors of interpretations, and this can be corrected. So public verification makes the scientific method such that the science can be self-correcting branch of knowledge. So this makes science self-correcting. And third is that the problems must be solvable. So in scientific research or in scientific inquiry, we do not entertain questions that cannot be empirically observed and verified. It must be accessible to our scientific method, and the problems must be such that it can be solved. If there is likelihood that the answer to the problem is not existent, then such research questions are not investigated by the scientific researchers. So these are three core criteria. I will end the class because you will have next class. Some other criteria of scientific method includes determinism, that I have already said during the assumptions of science. Parsimony means in Hindi it is called laghav, means saying the things in fewer words. So the scientific approach is more concise and precise. That is called parsimony. It is objective. Already Sandeep sir has explained this objectivity criteria. It is characterized by definiteness, and the observations made through these scientific methods can be generalized, and we can develop theories, and predictability is another aspect of the scientific method. So here I will stop for today because you are